Today we're going to talk about 3 simple ways to improve your photography. Hi guys, welcome back. This is Dylan Goldby here. Today we're going to be sitting in front of the computer and I'm just going to talk you through a few of the images that I've made and some simple ways that I feel you can improve your photography. For those that are interested, we're filming on a Fujifilm X-H1 with a 23mm f1.4 using AFC and face detect to make sure that I can do this by myself. I'm lighting this with a Godox AD200 with the ADL head on it, which is the LED head. It's not the brightest thing in the world, but I'm able to get about f2 shooting this right now. So it's a decent little addition for about $20 that you can add to the end of your existing flash to make it more useful for video. So let's jump right into it. The first component I feel that you can really work on to improve your photography is the obvious one, and that is composition. People talk all the time about things like the rule of thirds and not centering your horizons and all these sort of leading lines and all these sorts of things. Now you can learn those things one by one and sort of improve and be able to look at a scene and understand it in different ways. But I think that maybe the one thing that really will improve your composition the fastest and the most is to sit back and just say, well, what am I photographing? What is important here? And zero in on that. Simplify until you're only showing one message. So let's take a couple of examples of that. This first image here, this was shot in a busy street in downtown Yangon in the middle of the day. There are people everywhere going to and from work, taxis, people, playing football in the street, all sorts of things. And I found this one child who was she was enamored with the fact that we were there, and I really, really wanted to show just the beauty in this child's face. So I opened my aperture all the way up to f1.4, and I got as close as I could focus, and I stepped in and I made this picture. And so what you've seen here is that I've got rid of everything that didn't need to tell that story. The story I wanted to tell was this beautiful child's face, and nothing else mattered. So I used a swatch of concrete as the background. I just brought my camera up to my face and moved until I could see it, and then I sort of waved at her and had her look at me, and this is what I end up with. So I tell one story in this image. Let's take a look at the next one. Again, this one. This is at a Quran school in Yangon City again, and I wanted to give you an idea of how young this person was and also what they were doing. And I don't think that you need anything else. You don't need the rest of the children practicing their Quran lessons in the background. You don't need the teacher. You don't need where they are. All you really need is a pair of hands and the Quran to be able to understand who this person is, how young they are, and what they're doing. So again, this one's a little more complicated in what's in the frame, but I feel like it still tells the story. So there's this area of downtown Seoul called Jongno, and in that area you'll find that everything is fairly chaotic. There are doors, signs, ladders, and people absolutely everywhere, and every building's a different color. It's just a very, very interesting area of the city, and so I wanted to capture that in one frame, but also sort of give you a sense of who the people are that are there. So if you look to the right-hand side of this frame, there's a street, just cars going up and down. Look to the left, there's a couple of fish restaurants and jewelry stores and things like that, but none of that really tells you the story that I want to tell you, which is this human being with this sort of amazing building with pipes going everywhere and a vent coming out of it and all of that. So I zoomed in until I got just that, and by zoom I mean I walked in. This is a 23mm f2 that I was shooting on here, and so I literally just walked up and I made my frame and I waved at the man and I walked away. So this is another frame from downtown Yangon. Now this is in a busy market down in Chinatown. You are going to find thousands upon thousands of people streaming through here, and all I did to fix that, basically, to alleviate all of that distraction, was to get up high and above. This is one of the benefits of having the tilt screen on these little cameras, is that I'm able to tilt the screen up, hold the camera above, and still, compose properly and shoot a few frames. These people thought I was absolutely hilarious, and they kept sort of laughing at me, and I just waited and waited and waited until I got the point where they went back to work, and this is what I ended up with. Okay. Another simplification, this one is using the technique of leading lines. As you can see, the lines all go across the frame like that, and it leads you to one thing, and that's all. There are hundreds of people crossing this street, but I waited for the moment where I could get one and just get all of those lines. I stood and I waited. It took me about 3 times of people crossing the road to get somebody who was running, to show that sort of, I guess, the speed at which Seoul operates. This is again in Seoul City. But I wanted to be able to just have a very simplistic frame, keep my lines straight on the side here, and have just one person to show you just how quick life is in this city. As a final frame about composition, I want to talk about using silhouettes. The silhouettes can be a really good way to simplify down what's happening in the scene. Here you've got a rice farmer in just outside of Hoi An in Vietnam, and what you're going to see at these rice farms is just muck in the water and bits and pieces of rice. This is at the time when they're planting the rice, so you'll see there's just bits of rice and things everywhere. There'll be people riding by and all sorts of things. So I got down low to cut out all of the clutter, get rid of all the houses in the background, and I just waited until the farmer started walking across between 2 of the rice paddies, and I got this beautiful silhouette. Okay, so the second section of this is going to be about light. Now, light is kind of our raw material as photographers. It's kind of what we have to work with, and understanding it is really key to being able to improve your photography and teach you to be able to get a variety of different images out of a specific scene. So I'm going to talk about a few different kinds of light, and I'll show you some simple examples of how they work. Again, we'll start with one of my favorites, which is basically, let's say, door light, garage door light, awning light. It's the kind of light that when you're standing under a roof, you'll have light coming in from one direction, and if that hits somebody right in the face, it tends to fall off pretty quickly because they'll usually be quite close to that door frame, and you will be able to then allow that background to go pretty dark, which again leads to simplifying your composition. But this sort of light is very full, and it's very easy to flatter a person and just represent them, but in a nice kind of way. So I really like to use this kind of light. So another type of light that I like to use is backlight, and backlight can be really beautiful. You saw it before when we had the silhouette. That was actually backlight. So the light is behind the person or behind the subject, which allows you to render it as a silhouette. Now, if you dial up your exposure just a little bit and allow a little bit more light in, what you can do is get a little bit of extra detail in the foreground, and so that's what you're seeing here. You're able to see both that beautiful backlight streaming through, which I'll talk about in a moment, but you're also able to get some light in the foreground and see who these people are. It's not just a silhouette like you had before, which it works when you have the conical hats that you see in Vietnam. It's fairly representative of Southeast Asia and Vietnam in particular, and people instantly recognize that. However, this without the detail wouldn't work quite so well. So here with the backlight, what I've allowed the sun to do, the rising sun to do, is poke between 2 of these pillars, and what that does is it gives me a flare coming out between the 2 pillars. Now, you can use an f-stop of f11 or f16 and get these beautiful sun stars here, but I didn't want the point of the image to actually be the sunlight itself and the beauty of my technique. So what I did was I opened up to about f2, if I remember correctly, and I just allow it to kind of blow out into a halo. And that gives you this beautiful sense of, yes, it's morning, you get these beautiful bars of light, and then you can actually see what's happening as well. So another type of light that I really like to use is what you might call like a patchy light, or a location-specific light. So this could be a shaft of light coming through trees. It could be simply like this, just one street light in the middle of a city like this that allows you to just illuminate one thing. And by exposing for the highlights in this area, you're then able to let the other parts of the image just fall where they will. The other thing that benefits this image, of course, is that you have these older streetlights here, which burn orange, and then you have the newer fluorescents in these buildings that burn more of a blue. And so you're able to, really play off that set of colors as well. So one other thing that you can do with light is you can use a long exposure to allow it to form trails or blurs. If you've got moving subjects in your frame, especially those with lights on them, things like a cyclist, a car, something like that, you're able to then form these stripes. And so by using the light in the scene just to get the gate, I could have got, a nice representation of this gate itself, but by waiting for the cars to come through and allowing them to blur, and the bus that comes through across here, allowing that to blur, I'm able to create a sense of exactly what it feels like to be in that scene. This is the time to basically finish up work and go home in Seoul, so there are millions of people moving at this time, and there's just cars and horns and lights absolutely everywhere, and I wanted to convey that. So basically that's what we can do with a long exposure. Another type of light that will really benefit you to learn to use is side light. And basically side light is anything that comes from the side of your subject. And so here we've got this girl standing at a street stall. She was just getting some food, and I saw her tattoo and I thought, that's amazing, I need to make a portrait of you. She agreed, and so I had her just turn to me so that the light from the stall was hitting her here, and that allowed me to illuminate her brighter than the rest of the background, but also give a lot of dimension to her face. Light hits here, it causes a shadow here, which creates shape in the two-dimensional medium that we work in. So we don't have that three-dimensional space in our photographs, so we have to create that somehow, and side light is one really, really good way to do that. So here's another good example of side light, and this is where you're able to use shadows and light as a compositional element. So this is in Hoi An in Vietnam as well, and we've got the sun coming from up here, and it's hitting a tree, which then casts a shadow down the wall here, and there's another tree just over this side that's casting this shadow, and then it hits the back of her hat to give it some real shape, completely obscures her face, and we've got this very sort of graphic representation of Hoi An, Vietnam. Okay, so the final, and probably in my opinion the most important thing that you can do to improve your photography is to learn to look for moments. A moment, a good, strong, emotional human moment, can elevate a bad composition and poor light into making a passable or a good photograph, something that people will really appreciate. Of course, if you have all three of those things, you're gold. That's portfolio action right there. But a moment is something that you should really, after you've looked at your composition and looked at your light, a moment is something you should really be looking for to bring your photographs to the next level. So I'm going to go back to that previous image that I shot in Vietnam. I waited there for probably 20 seconds just to see if this lady would actually turn her head, and when she did, you get a very different photograph. So no longer do we have that completely in shadow, just sort of graphical representation of a person in Vietnam. Now we have who they are as well. It becomes a very different photograph now that you can see who this person is. And for me, I feel like they both work really, really well together. So this is about light, but it's also about moment. So I waited for the light to be right for my composition. So all three of those things together. This next one, again, this is very simple light. This is just around the corner from where I was. This is in the waterfront market in Hoi An in Vietnam. And you can make a very graphic composition out of these sort of concentric circles, or these bits and pieces that you find in the markets here, especially with the conical hats. And so again, I got up high and above this, and I just waited for her hand to come out from under her hat, so that it wouldn't just be a graphic representation of vegetables on circular plates and then a hat, but actually there's a human in there as well. So that moment, I feel like, is what makes this image. Again, this is a case of finding the right light, in this case very close to sunset in Seoul, finding a good composition, in this case a graphic element of the arrow here, and then just waiting for somebody to walk across the street. And this is a crossing up here, so I was expecting a few people to walk. But what ended up happening was someone walked, stopped, and looked at this fool who happened to be photographing the arrow on the ground, and that formed what I feel is actually a better image. Okay, again, this one. I took probably 10 or 15 photos here, and it wasn't until the man behind me at the tea shop called out and said, "Hey, this guy's making your photograph," that one of the gentlemen looked up at me, and I feel like that made it it was a point of connection for me as the viewer of the photograph. So I think that this moment really makes this. I have him reading, I have him looking out down the street, all sorts of different moments with the same composition, but I feel like this one is the strongest. And again, you're looking here at this kind of awning light. So there's a roof that comes out over them, which is shading light coming from the top. And you've got a lot of light coming in this way, but you're also at the corner of a street, so I have a little bit more light giving them shape coming in this way. This, okay. Sometimes you'll run across moments and you won't have to wait for them. They'll just be things that happen and you think, oh my gosh, I have to make a picture of that. And these two kids sitting on top of a stack of pellets, watching a video together, I found to be absolutely hilarious, and I made a picture of it, and then I went over and I showed it to them, and they thought it was just as hilarious as I did. They hadn't realized just how high up they were. So this to me is quite an interesting moment as well. Okay, this is in Yangon in Myanmar as well, where trishaws are becoming less and less, but they're still a prevalent method of getting around the city. And these guys, they'll stop and take breaks and smoke on their cheroot. And I was photographing this door. I was just waiting for something to happen here. And this guy rolled in, looked at me, looked at the wall, pulled a cheroot out, prepared to light it up, and that was my moment. I made this frame and I thanked him and walked away. I don't think he realized quite how good it was going to be. So this is the same thing again. I love these old supermarkets in Korea. So I found the door to one of these, and you can make a great taxonomy of them on their own, but I like to have a human element and sort of give you an idea of who lives here as well. So I posted up, got this composition sorted out. I wanted to make sure I included all of the crazy wiring and the little doors and all that sort of thing. And then I just waited for the right character to come through, and it was about 4 or 5 people that walked through before this guy decided to cycle right through, and I shot a couple of frames of him coming through, and then he turned his head just as he got to this break in the 2 doors, and that was my moment. That's what I feel represents the situation the best. Okay, so the final thing that I want to talk about in terms of moment is what's probably not the most obvious moment. So, you might think that, well, in a portrait, of course, there's a moment. In street photography, of course, there's a moment. But in landscape photography, your moment often has to do with the right light. It might be rays coming through clouds. It might be waiting for the sun to just peek over the horizon. Or in this case, waiting for the sun to just go below the horizon and all the city lights to come on. In that case, I get this beautiful balance of the city light and the blue hour sky. So landscape photography also has a moment. Alright guys, so I hope you've enjoyed that, and I hope that gives you some ideas about how you might want to go out and try and improve your photography. Even if you've been doing this for a long time, it can be great to just exercise these things, to practice them, to bring them to the forefront of your memory. So I do recommend just get out, shoot with intention, Learn to pick up your camera and say, okay, today I want to create something like this, whether it be photographs with lines, using a particular kind of light, a new technique for composition, getting in close and just cutting out everything that's unessential. All these things can serve to build your repertoire of techniques that you can then apply to situations later on. And if you don't practice them, you'll forget them, you won't use them. If you're just new to this, get out there, make 1,000 frames using just backlight, see what happens. Dial your exposure down until you're shooting silhouettes, then open it up and shoot really bright frames. See what you get, see what happens. Experimenting like this can really, really give you some magic. So I recommend continually practicing this sort of stuff. So we're going to wrap it up there. If you've got any questions, throw them in the comments below. Give us a thumbs up if you've enjoyed the video. Head over to the blog post with this to see larger versions of the images and get a good look at them. If you have any questions about the gear that's being used, feel free to throw that in below as well. Another video you might want to check out is actually my video on wide-angle portraits, which will give you an idea of how to use a really wide-angle lens to do what maybe people don't normally consider it good at, which is taking photographs of people. So thanks again for watching, guys. Have a great week.